Have you ever wondered where Jiminy Cricket is from? Would you be surprised to know that Jiminy Cricket was inspired by Francisco Soler's Cri-Cri, which is a little singing cricket that Francisco uses to narrate a lot of his children's songs? Would you like to to know more about the protest that Cri-Cri created? Even though he seems like a pretty non-controversial person? Well, I'm here to tell you about all that in my presentation about Francisco Soler's Cri-Cri, by me, of course, Sofia de la Torre. Today in this presentation, we will be talking about who is Soler and Cri-Cri, what are some of the problems his songs protest, what are the statistics and context of these problems, what are some of the things that these songs do to help protest, aka in another terms, what are some of the things that his songs do to help talk to children, as that is his main form of protest, right? Then we're going to talk about culture loss. We're going to talk about bonding generations together and loss of history, those three, which are the problems that his songs protest. Then we are going to talk about my conclusion, and then we're going to talk about where to find my sites for all this, like where did I get all this information. And on the side, you can see this little lovable cricket who was the inspiration, believe it or not, for Jiminy Cricket, which was very famous in Walt Disney. Okay, so first we're going to talk about who is Francisco Soler and who is Cri-Cri. So Francisco Soler was born in Veracruz in 1907, and he is a Mexican composer and songwriter who used the pen name Cri-Cri. And Cri-Cri means he was like a little singing cricket, and it was the French onomatopoeia for the sound a cricket makes when it chirps. So that's where he got the idea to name it Cri-Cri. Before he entered radio life, he entered the National Observatory of Mexico to study astronomy. But unfortunately, his studies had to be cut short due to a lack of resources. When he was 25 years old, he finally began performing as a professional musician in the bathhouses. And he entered the radio field during the Mexican age of golden radio. And he was one of the main figures in this golden age of Mexican radio. And he started with his humorous social criticisms in the bathhouses under the pen name El Guasón del Teclado, which means the Joker of the keyboard. And he used the experiences of his childhood while he was acting as El Guasón del Teclado to write children's songs. And he would preview some of them on the radio sometimes. And on October 15th, 1934, he realized, oh, hey, my children's songs are actually gaining quite a bit of popularity. And so for the very first time, he appeared on radio station XEW in the middle of Mexico City, singing many of the children's songs that he had written. And then that is when he decided to fully dedicate himself to a children's audience. And his creations, he has created over 234 children's songs, and these creations have impacted generations upon generations upon generations. Now, what are some of the problems that his songs protest? Well, there are three main protests that his songs cover. First, they protest culture loss. They protested the loss of Spanish culture and the loss of Mexican nationalism that was happening during the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. Second, he protests the separation of ages and generational gaps by creating songs that both the young and the old can relate to back then and now too. He created songs that were both for the young at heart and for the actual young. Finally, he protested the loss of, this is more recently has become a protest, he protested the loss of Mexican history, because back when he was creating these songs, he created a lot of songs that told the songs of everyday life, a lot of the stories told songs of the average Mexican person and what they experience. So now when we listen to them, they become very telltale of how life was like during that time. And that really helps protest the loss of history, especially for kids, because it is much more accessible to children if a story or history is being told in a song than if it is being read in a textbook. So now let's talk about the context of the problem and statistics. So first off, to start the problem, let's start talking about the year 1934, the very same year that Francisco Soler started broadcasting on the Mexican radio. The year 1934 was a very significant mark for Mexican culture. That was the year that the Palace of Fine Arts was inaugurated in the Mexican culture. And they started focusing more on the fine arts And also at the same time, that was when General Lazaro Cardenas, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, became president. Now, this is important because he was he had a vision of a very socialist education. And so he established that this was a priority in the primary schools. And therefore, he wanted there to be nationalist values in music, plastic arts, and dance. Additionally, there was another person who's named Alevero Obregon, and he established this educational project that stated that school children would dedicate a significant number of their time at school to learn Mexican songs and sing the Mexican songs. And in these singing, they would learn about Mexican culture, they would help get nationalist pride, and they would go ahead and learn sometimes the Spanish language, because, obviously they were kids, but sometimes they would also learn indigenous language that were in Mexico too. Cri-Cri was able to take advantage of this. All of these policies that were put in place to protest the loss of culture and the loss of nationalism, because he had just gotten into the radio. That was during the golden age of radio, and his songs were a lot about the culture that the Mexican children needed in their school. So as a result, a lot of his songs started getting played during the schools, right? So I asked my mom, because she grew up in the 60s, 70s, and she said, yeah, when she was in school, a lot of these policies were still in place, and thus she was learning a lot of the Mexican culture from these songs. So these songs definitely helped protest the loss of Mexican culture, because they told a lot of folk tales. They told a lot of tales about holidays. They told a lot of tales. They had like spin-offs on fable tales. They had like traditional Mexican tales. A lot of them were fables, and a lot of them became integral parts of Mexican culture. Additionally, nowadays, this helps because even though now here in the US, we don't really have this specific educational policies about increasing nationalism and culture here. Here in the US, we have decreasing Hispanic identities. Even though more than 18% of the people here in the US identify as Hispanic or Latino, this trend is going downwards because there's a lot of interracial marriage, and there's also declining immigration from Latin America. Thus, there's less people nowadays identifying as Hispanic or Latino. Now, Soler's songs help protest this, because with the decreasing Hispanic identities, we can also increase them by helping kids that listen to these songs become more connected to their ancestors. Because while these songs was written in the 30s, 40s, 50s, this is like the kids that are my age, those are their grandparents. Their parents are their grandparents. So these songs right here that are written can really help the kids who feel like they're losing that Hispanic identity gain it back, because the whole point of these songs was to help the government and help the children at that time regain their culture. So that can definitely help kids here. Also, for a lot of the kids here who feel like their parents didn't teach them didn't teach them Spanish and they taught them English instead, they can help them regain the Spanish language. I know for me, at least when I was little, I was played a lot of these songs, and they helped me learn Spanish as a child. So a lot of these songs can be helped to learn the Spanish language. Now, let's talk about what are some of the things that his songs do to help protest, right? So one of the things that you have to understand is that making protest songs for children is very hard, right? Unlike many protest songs, his songs aim to target children because they're trying to target the loss of the nationalism, right? So children are a harder age gap because they don't have fully developed frontal cortexes, and they can't grasp a lot of like this abstract concepts such as culture loss the same way that adults can. In my psychology class that I took in my junior year of high school, we learned a lot about how children can get information through song, and we also talked a lot about lullabies. Now, when children are young, the connection between body and song is very important. That's why in a lot of songs that you sing when you're little, you'll have connections between like the body and the song. So usually, like, one example that I can think of off the top of my head is head, shoulders, knees, and toes, right? So the adult will sing to the child, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, right? And the child will go ahead and touch head, shoulders, knees, and toes, right? Or another one, they'll do like the chicken dance, like, they'll do like da 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 da, right? So it's a huge part of the child's life to be talking about to have this connection between the body and the music. Now, Francisco Soler does a really good job of this, of connecting the body to the music. And he does a really good job of this. And one way you can see this is in his theme song, which I will play a short snippet of right here.
¿Quién es el que anda aquí? Es Cri-Cri, es Cri-Cri. ¿Y quién es ese señor?
So one thing you can see is that right here, the little interval jumps right here that increase. Let me grab my little mouse pointer so I can show you. These little interval jumps right here, and right here are increasing in size. And these interval jumps help kind of mimic the jumping of a cricket, which is really helpful for children who may not be able to grasp, a lot of the things yet. But you know what they can grasp? They can grasp like how music can it kind of helps them imagine jumping, which is what a cricket would do, because the notes are going da 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 da. The intervals are getting longer and longer, almost as if they're going like an ascending trajectory of the jump. They're getting higher and higher and higher, and this staccato form right here really helps like the short tight jumps that a cricket will make. ¿Quién es el que anda aquí? Es Cri-Cri, es Cri-Cri. So it makes those jumps much higher, and it helps going ahead and indicate a cricket. So a lot of people would say that this song has the icon of a cricket. Additionally, uses the resemblance theory as well. Okay, next we're going to talk about culture loss and how his songs help protest this culture loss. So the main song that we're going to be talking about when we talk about culture loss is El Ratón Vaquero, which is probably one of the most well-known Cri-Cri songs. And it was also the very first song that Francisco performed on the XEW radio. So I'm going to play just like a few short clips of the song so you can kind of get an idea of what the song is about. So basically, this song, if you don't speak Spanish, it tells the story of a famous Mexican folktale, which is the story of a mouse that is stuck in jail, and he is an American mouse, by the way, and he is like, get me out of here, and Soler sings oh, I'm not gonna let you out, even though you speak English, I'm not gonna let you out. And it's a polka, and it's supposed to resemble American music. So let me go ahead and play it for you. I'll play a little bit of the introduction, a little bit of the lyrics, and a little bit of the end. We have this very rhythmic clapping. And then, in the middle, for the lyrics,
Las fuertes rejas que resguardan la prisión, mueve las orejas.
See, it kind of slows down a little bit. And then we're going to skip a little bit to the end. So that's basically, you can kind of get like a tell for what the song is. So let me go ahead and go to the next slide. So let's talk more about the song and let's analyze it in depth. So let's talk about first the symbol. The use of the polka in the music, the polka, that acts as a symbol for American music and thus alludes to the main character being of North American origin. Now, this is really important because for young kids, they might not be able to get some of those, the little lyrics, they might not be able to understand them yet if they're really little, or if they're still learning Spanish, they still might not be able to understand some of the more complicated words. So by using polka, it's able to go ahead and set this and build these cultural scenarios and build these characters that populate them, right? And this right here, using the polka music, is able to build a scene of an American mouse in jail, even if you don't understand much Spanish. Additionally, as we talked about, the use of body and music is very important for young kids. So by creating a clapping at the beginning, like da 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 da, it creates a regular pulse, as well as the shouts and exclamation of joy, like oh, oh, that invites the audience to come participate, which is very important for the young children who, they learn very bad, and a lot of their music is focused on, hey, come perform with us, right? So this helps it be more aimed towards the children. And you can really tell that Soler really knows his audience. And finally, one more thing that I found interesting is that the subject of enunciation in his music is the I, right? So he says, in English, he says, like, the mouse says, let me out, right? And then Soler sings, like, even though you speak English, I'm not going to be letting you out. I know you're upset, but I'm not going to be letting you out, right? So using the first person kind of makes a parody of the typical cowboy that we see here in the US, right? Because here in the US, when we think of a cowboy, we usually think of, like, if we think about a cowboy in jail, we usually think about, like, a Mexican cowboy. So in Mexico, it's kind of funny because they have a parody on that. It's an American cowboy in jail that the Mexicans aren't letting out instead of the other way around. So that I found is pretty funny. So the telling of this folk tale has a lot more into it than just, telling the folk tale to a child. It invites the child to perform. It has symbols in it that help set and build cultural scenarios. And additionally, it has subjects of enunciation that create a parody of the typical cowboy. Now we're going to talk very shortly about two other songs that I found that are also folk tales. So one of these is Los Cochinitos, which means the little pigs. And this is the remix of the famous American folk tale, The Three Little Pigs. And usually in the story, they're about to get eaten by a wolf. But this basically, it tells a remix of it, and it tells us tender situation about the desires that each of the little pigs has when it sleeps. This is an interesting one because it tells a little bit about American culture in a way that's remixed for the Mexican children. Finally, there are a lot of his songs that were not based off of folk tales, but instead that Cri-Cri himself, or Francisco Soler, created. So one of the examples of this is La Muñeca Fea, which is basically about this doll who's really ugly and is sent to the attic, and there she meets a mouse, and the mouse says, "Hey, you have a lot of friends here. You have a spider, you have an old suitcase, you have a dustpan, and these are all your friends." And even though he made this song completely up back in, like, the 30s or 40s, it has formed Mexican culture, and it has now become an essential part of Mexican popular culture. Now, whenever you reference La Muñeca Fea over in Mexican culture, everyone will instantly understand what you're talking about. They'll instantly understand, oh, La Muñeca Fea? Yeah, that's talking about the ugly doll, right? And they will instantly get this reference because this right here, this folktale, even though it wasn't originally, when he sang it, a part of Mexican culture, it is now ingrained as a part of Mexican culture. And has prevented the loss of a lot of Mexican culture through becoming, it has not just protested the loss of Mexican culture, it has actually acted against that by becoming a part of Mexican culture, which I think is really cool. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about how he protested the loss of culture by using many different genres. Now, throughout his songs, he has helped the children learn lots of different types of Mexican culture by including lots of different genres in his music. He has used foxtrot, waltz, tango, Mexican songs, habanera, Spanish language, and he's also used way more guaracha, danzón, Mexican song, Barcelona, jota, and even rhythms with oriental patterns, which I think is really fun. So he's definitely helped protest that loss of culture by making sure his songs cover a lot of different types of traditional Mexican genres that are both from the indigenous parts and throughout the traditional parts of Mexico. Next, let's talk about how his songs help with the generational gaps. Now, one of the things that has happened is there's often gaps between older and younger people. And this is especially true in the US, in Mexico and in the US too, but mostly in Mexico, where there's almost like separate pronouns that are used for older people and younger people. There's like a huge respect. So a lot of times the younger people feel like it's harder to relate to the older people. Now, Francisco Soler was able to make his songs relatable to generations throughout generations throughout generations. And now I can talk to my grandma and tell her about Cri-Cri, and she'll immediately understand what I'm saying. So one of the examples that I found of this songs being related throughout generations and generations is El Ratón Vaquero, which is a song we were talking about earlier. How it was played in 3 different generations. How it was played for our parents and grandparents, people our age, and Generation Alpha, how they all dance to this song. So I'm going to play you short clips of like each generation dancing to this song. So this is our parents and grandparents age dancing to this song. And when I was talking to my mom, she said she did this exact same dance when she was in primary school. And so did my grandma as well. My grandma did this exact same dance when she was in primary school. So this is like definitely a very common dance that a lot of people know. So this is for the parents. And then this is from when I was little. This is not me. This is like from like, someone else. But this is from kids that are my age. that are also dancing to the same song. And so finally, this is Generation Alpha, which is the ones that are 13 and under, still dancing to this song today. So this is a Roblox character dancing. So basically, as you can see, these songs have continued on for generations to generations to generations, and has helped tell the story of the older generations, such as El Ratón Vaquero, to the younger generations, which you can clearly see are still using today. You know, a lot of these folk tales would probably been lost into time if it weren't for these songs that kept these stories. Next, we're going to talk about how it protests the loss of how his songs protested the loss of history and how this protest was gained this political meaning later in the future. So Soler's songs basically captured many different portions of the Mexican people, especially the middle class. His characters represented social types with their concerns, aspirations, qualities, and defects. Now, through his songs, which typically talked about that time, now we can look back and see, oh, those were the concerns of the people in the 30s and 40s. These were the thoughts of the peoples in the 30s and 40s. And now we can protest the loss of the history that would have been lost. Now we can look back, I can look back as a kid and look and see what the problems were with my grandma's generation. And it prevents the loss of history that might not be accessible to young children. So it protests this loss through making sure that it is still accessible to kids today, that they can still listen to these types of songs. Finally, in conclusion, through making his music have many metaphors between the body and the music, it helped give his characters life and help make these protests more accessible to children. Through in the end, he was able to help protest the loss of Mexican culture, language, and nationalism, and he was ultimately very successful. As you can see, his songs have lasted for many generations to come. Not only has he helped fight against the loss of this through making songs, but he's even created parts of Mexican culture through his songs that people these days still relate to. So, in conclusion, he has done a very good job of protesting the loss of Mexican culture, and his songs will be forever cherished by many generations to come. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. This is the end. Thank you to Slides Carnival for these beautiful slides that I have modified. And if you would like to see the sources, I will be going ahead and turning in a Google Doc on Canvas. And I will also be posting the link below this video to make sure that you can see where I got all my information from. Thank you very much for listening and have a nice day. And Ratón Vaquero.